On the 15th of August 1947, the Indian Independence Act came into effect. Although George VI of the United Kingdom remained the nominal head of state of India until January 1950, his role as Emperor of India came to an end in practical terms in August 1947. This dismantling of Britain's empire was but one of the many political challenges that the royal House of Windsor dealt with during the 20th century. What were the other issues that confronted Britain's most modern dynastic line, and how have they dealt with them? This is the story of the House of Windsor, the family that modernized the British monarchy. The House of Windsor has echoes of earlier English royal families like the House of Lancaster and the House of York, in that it is not an entirely distinct royal dynasty. Both the Lancastrians that assumed the throne of England when Henry IV became king in 1399 and the House of York that claimed the crown in 1461 in the middle of the Wars of the Roses were branches of the royal House of Plantagenet. Both lines were ultimately descended in a fairly straightforward manner from King Edward III of the House of Plantagenet, who had ruled down to his death in 1377. Similarly, the House of Windsor is really a continuation of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Dynastic houses have traditionally been established via the male line. Therefore, when King George I succeeded to the throne back in 1714, it ushered in the House of Hanover to replace the House of Stuart, as his claim to the throne was via his descent from a daughter of King James I. The Hanoverians prevailed until 1901. Queen Victoria, who ruled from 1837 to 1901, was the last member of that dynasty. The fact that her son Edward VII became king in 1901 opened up a unique situation in British royal history. Although England and Britain had 4 other queens in the past, neither Mary I, Elizabeth I, Mary II, or Anne I had a child that succeeded them. If they had, the dynastic line would have shifted. For instance, Mary had been married to Philip II of Spain, where the ruling dynasty was the House of Habsburg. If their union had produced a son who became King of England, then that monarch would have started a new royal House of Habsburg in England. With Victoria's passing, the royal dynasty now became the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1901, which was the name of the aristocratic house that Queen Victoria's long-deceased husband, Prince Albert, hailed from. As Albert's son, Edward VII was the first ruler of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and in 1910, his son and heir, King George V, became the second ruler of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. So how did the House of Windsor enter into the equation? That is rooted in the politics of the First World War. In 1914, after a month of escalating tensions in the Balkans between Austria-Hungary and Russia from late June, Europe's powers began declaring war on each other one by one in late July and early August. At the end of the process, Britain declared war on Germany on the 4th of August in response to its invasion of neutral Belgium. The war brought with it a wave of intense anti-German sentiment, and this placed the royal family in a difficult position. Not only was George V a grandson of Prince Albert, a German aristocrat before he married Queen Victoria, but the family had numerous additional strands of German blood. King George I had arrived to rule over Britain and Ireland in 1714 from Hanover in northern Germany, where he was Prince Elector. He could not speak English at the time. Awareness of this German heritage in multiple strands of the royal family's genealogy, and the very obvious fact that the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was a German-sounding dynastic name, led to criticism of the monarchy in some quarters during the war. This peaked in the spring of 1917, after the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare in the Atlantic Ocean by the Germans put fresh pressure on the British domestic economy, especially on supplies of lighting oil, which primarily came to Britain from the United States. In response, George V, after consultation with the government, made the formal decision before the Privy Council on the 17th of July 1917 to change the name of the royal family from the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the House of Windsor. The new name was derived from Windsor Castle, the greatest seat of the English and British monarchy since medieval times. Additional branches of the extended royal family also took new titles. For instance, the Battenberg branch became the Mountbattens, while several family members who were members of the German House of Teck adopted the Cambridge title. Hence was born the House of Windsor. It was not really a new dynastic line. Instead, the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was simply renamed in 1917 in the light of wartime pressures. When is the perfect time to make a lasting change? New Year gives us the greatest chance at a fresh start, but resolutions can fade quickly. I found that real change comes from small changes in habits over time that helps us to grow. Talking to a sympathetic ear can reinforce those changes, such as re-evaluating your reactions, for example, or stress management through mindfulness. BetterHelp are an online therapy site used by over 6 million people to help you live a happier, healthier life. This is a paid partnership with BetterHelp to promote their services. BetterHelp connects you with a credentialed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. So, if something is interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals, then BetterHelp might be the solution for you. With BetterHelp, you can bypass the difficulties associated with face-to-face therapy, as you can have your therapy sessions as a phone call, as a video chat, or even via messaging if you prefer that. Whatever's the most comfortable version of therapy for you. To get started, you fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs, and then you'll be matched with your therapist. If you think you might benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/dynasticprofiles to get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp therapy. The first monarch of the House of Windsor, King George V, was born on the 3rd of June 1865 at Marlborough House in Westminster in London. This was at the very height of Britain's global power, and George was sent off to travel the world as a member of the Royal Navy when he was little more than a child in the late 1870s. He became King of the United Kingdom and Emperor of India on the 6th of May 1910, a few weeks before he turned 45. It was a position that did not come naturally to him. George was a reserved man who enjoyed quiet family life and stamp collecting. His character was very much at odds with the times he lived through. The First World War broke out 4 years after he rose to the throne, and George became a wartime monarch. This was the event that eventually led to the creation of the House of Windsor. There were other challenges during it. For instance, after the Russian revolutions of 1917, George's cousin, Tsar Nicholas II, began petitioning the British government to allow his family to come to live in exile in England after he was deposed. George quietly blocked the move, as he was anxious that the presence of the former imperial family of Russia in Britain might create political problems. Beyond this, he ruled during a time when women were given the vote in Britain. The first Labour government came to power in 1924, and the Great Depression impacted the nation in the early 1930s. Throughout it all, George remained a broadly steady and uncontroversial monarch. By George's side was his wife Mary of Teck. She was a second cousin of George's once removed, who was born and raised in London, despite the Teck dynastic name also being Germanic. They married in 1893 after Mary's planned marriage to George's older brother, Prince Albert Victor, was scuppered by his premature death. George and Mary would have 6 children together. The eldest, the future King Edward VIII, was born in 1894, followed by the future King George VI in December 1895. Then Princess Mary in April 1897, Prince Henry in March 1900, Prince George in December 1902, and finally Prince John in July 1905. The future George VI was known as Albert or Bertie throughout most of his life. He only assumed the name George when he became king in honor of his father and in order to provide a sense of political stability. This explains why he had a younger brother named Prince George. All of the members of the wider House of Windsor are descended from 4 of these 6 children. Edward VIII never had any children, while Prince John died on the 18th of January 1919 when he was 13 years old, due to complications from epilepsy and other health issues. Mary was a comparatively modern queen consort. She devoted much of her time to charitable causes and attempted to forge a deeper connection between the royal family and the common people of Britain. In the early 1920s, following the First World War, an ornate giant doll's house was produced for Mary, a highly complex design that involved hundreds of people producing things like real miniature books that would fit into the house. It went on display at the British Empire Exhibition in 1924 and was visited by over 1.5 million people. Mary would ultimately outlive both her husband by 17 years and even his heir, George VI, dying at 85 years of age in 1953. King George V died on the 20th of January 1936. His health had been poor since middle age, owing to a declining respiratory condition that was shared by several family members and which was exacerbated by lifelong smoking. Already by the 1920s, he and Mary were spending time in southern Europe, hoping that the warmer Mediterranean air would improve his conditions. As he entered his late 60s in the mid-1930s, he and Mary became increasingly concerned about the succession. Their eldest son, Edward, was about to enter his 40s and was still not married. Instead, he had been something of a playboy in the 1920s, and when he did enter a more steady relationship in the 1930s, it was with a twice-married divorcee named Wallis Simpson. In the 1930s, it was considered unacceptable for the future king to even consider marrying a previously divorced woman, who was also still legally married to her second husband when she began an affair with Edward. Furthermore, she was an American and a commoner. Both were seen as problematic by the standards of the time. Thus, when George V died at the start of 1936, those who knew about Edward's relationship saw that there might be trouble ahead, especially so because Simpson would turn 40 in the summer of 1936, and there was virtually no chance of their potential marriage resulting in children and an heir. Although Edward's coronation was planned for the 12th of May 1937, the abdication crisis boiled over in the autumn of 1936, when the government of Stanley Baldwin began liaising with the wider royal family about the relationship. News of the affair became public on the 2nd of December 1936. Thereafter, it became abundantly clear that Parliament sided with Baldwin. Edward refused to end his relationship with Simpson, and on the 11th of December 1936, he abdicated in favor of his brother Albert, who succeeded as King George VI. Edward was the first monarch to ever voluntarily abdicate the throne of England, Britain, or the United Kingdom. Other kings had been removed before, such as Edward II in 1327, but they had always done so in scenarios where they had experienced a military defeat of some kind. The controversy did not end there with Edward. Financial arrangements were put in place to support him and Wallis, and they planned to go to live in France in order to avoid any problems with the new monarch and royal family. He married Simpson there in 1937. Then, in October of that year, they undertook an extensive visit to Nazi Germany, meeting with senior figures like Adolf Hitler and Hermann Goering, while also touring Germany's factories to see how the Nazis had allegedly turned the German economy around after the Great Depression. When the Second World War broke out, rumours swirled that Edward was still in contact with the German government, although he and Wallis did flee to Spain and then Portugal in 1940 after the Battle of France. A decision was taken in England not to allow them to return to Britain. Instead, they were sent to the Bahamas, a British colony of which Edward was made the wartime governor. After the war, they returned to live in France and spent the remainder of their lives there. Edward died in 1972. His actions, both briefly as the second monarch of the House of Windsor and afterwards in Europe before and during the war, remain controversial. George VI was quite similar to his father in many ways. Being king did not come naturally to him, and indeed one of the issues during the abdication crisis of 1936 had been whether Bertie would even accept the kingship if it was thrust upon him. He reluctantly accepted the role when it became clear that Edward would not relent and would have to abdicate. Nevertheless, in spite of his initial reluctance, George turned out to be a good monarch. He did have a stutter, as portrayed in the 2010 film The King's Speech, and he also underwent a form of innovative therapy with Lionel Logue to try to reduce its severity when he was engaged in public speaking events. However, this had largely occurred back in the mid-1920s, long before he became king, and George had also experienced an improvement quite quickly after starting working with Logue, whereas the film suggests a more protracted struggle with his stammer after he became king and at the start of the Second World War. George married Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon in 1923. She was the daughter of Claude Bowes-Lyon, 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn. Elizabeth and George had two daughters. The future Queen Elizabeth II was born on the 21st of April 1926, while Princess Margaret was born 4.5 years later in August 1930. Their mother lived to be 101 years of age, only dying in 2002, a half a century after her husband. In order to avoid any confusion over titles, after Elizabeth II became Queen, George VI's widow became known as the Queen Mother throughout the remainder of her life. Although the Queen Mother was born in England, she considered herself to be of broadly Scottish descent and established the House of Windsor's affinity for the northern part of Britain. George VI ruled through the darkest period in Britain's modern history. When his coronation took place on the 12th of May 1937, there were already strong signs that Nazi Germany was preparing for a new major war to reclaim some of the lands which Germany had lost after the First World War. The road to war was swift thereafter. Austria was annexed in March 1938, followed by the Sudetenland in the autumn, and then the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. When the Nazis invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, Britain and France responded by declaring war on Germany 2 days later, on the 3rd of September. George delivered a national radio broadcast that evening, in which he stated that, "If one and all be resolutely faithful today, ready for whatever service or sacrifice it may demand, with God's help we shall prevail." His relationship with Winston Churchill was initially tense after Churchill succeeded Neville Chamberlain as Britain's wartime leader in May 1940. But gradually they developed a good working rapport as the Battle of Britain progressed. There were some clashes. George, for instance, wanted to take part in the D-Day landings in northern France in June 1944, even if it was simply to be seen in Normandy, days after the initial landings. Churchill vetoed this for fear that the king might be killed. The royal family had won a lot of respect by then for the manner in which they had conducted themselves during the war, with rationing imposed on the House of Windsor the same as anyone else. George also spearheaded the initiative to begin awarding the George Medal and George Cross, two new royal honours that were awarded to anyone not directly involved in military service who had distinguished themselves in another capacity. The House of Windsor suffered directly as a result of the war. George VI's younger brother was George, Duke of Kent. Like so many royal sons in the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries, he had served in the Royal Navy back in the 1920s as a young man. After rising to the rank of lieutenant, he ended his active service in 1929 when he was 26 years old. A brief stint as a civil servant was followed by him becoming Duke of Kent in 1934 when he married Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. George held positions in both the growing Royal Air Force and the British Army in the second half of the 1930s, but these were formalities at a time when he was actually being prepared to become the Governor-General of Australia, which was an important post within the British Commonwealth. That plan was foiled when the war broke out, and George returned to active service in the Royal Navy. He transferred not long afterwards to the Royal Air Force at a time when the front lines of the war were the skies above Britain as the German Blitz began. On the 25th of August 1942, George was scheduled to fly to Reykjavik in Iceland on a morale-boosting mission. He and several others, which along with the crew made up 15 men, took off in a short Sunderland Mark III from an airbase in the Murray Firth. Not long after, the plane crashed near Dunbeath, killing George and all of the passengers and crew except for one survivor. The ensuing report concluded that the disaster was due to a navigational error exacerbated by heavy wind. George has the unenviable distinction of being the first senior royal to be killed in active service since the 15th century. While Prince Maurice of Battenberg, a grandson of Queen Victoria, had died during the First World War, George was the son of a king and the brother of 2 others. Prior to this, we have to go back to the time of King Richard III and the profusion of royals that were killed in combat during the 14th and 15th centuries, before we see as senior a member of the royal family dying in active service. There were 2 other members of the House of Windsor during these years beyond the senior branch of the family. George V and Mary of Teck's only daughter, Princess Mary, became a very public promoter of nursing and medical services and organizations during her lifetime. She had started visiting hospitals with her mother during the First World War, and towards the end of the conflict had decided to start a nursing course at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. 9 days after the armistice was declared on the 11th of November 1918, she travelled across the English Channel to France to visit the field hospitals there on the now peaceful Western Front. Thereafter, she became a key patron of many nursing and veterans groups. She married Henry Lascelles, 6th Earl of Harewood, in 1922 and had 2 sons, George and Gerald, with him. Mary lived down to 1965 and was known for being a dependable and uncontroversial royal. Mary's younger brother, Henry, was of a similar demeanour for a lot of his life. He was born in 1900 and was too young to play much of a ceremonial role in the First World War. He served in the military during the interwar period and became Duke of Gloucester and Earl of Ulster in 1928. Around this time, he began an affair with Beryl Markham, a pioneering female aviator who was married when she and Henry began seeing one another. This resulted in Henry having to pay hush money to try to avoid news of the affair becoming public in later years. Eventually, he married Lady Alice Montague Douglas Scott in 1935. In May 1940, he was in Belgium when the Nazis began the rapid conquest of Western Europe. Steps were taken to ensure he was never placed in as much danger again after he made it back to Britain, as Henry could easily have been killed in the German advance in the early summer of 1940. After the war, he took up the post of Governor-General of Australia, down to 1947. He continued as a working royal until 1965, when he became unable to perform his duties following a stroke. Henry died in 1974, the last of the 6 children of George V and Mary of Teck to die. Henry lived to see his niece, Elizabeth II, serve as Queen of the United Kingdom for over 2 decades. George VI died on the 6th of February 1952 at only 56 years of age. This meant that 25-year-old Elizabeth became Queen sooner than she probably had expected to. By then, she had already been married for 5 years. Back in the summer of 1939, before the war broke out, Elizabeth had visited the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth with her parents. She met her distant cousin, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, for the first time there. He was the grandson of King George I of Greece. In between his military service during the war, Philip visited the Windsors during Christmas 1943. Elizabeth was smitten by her cousin and determined to marry him, which they did after the war on the 20th of November 1947. They would have 4 children together. Their eldest child, the future King Charles III, was born on the 14th of November 1948. Princess Anne followed in August 1950. There was then an unusually large gap before Andrew was born in February 1960. Finally, their 4th and final child, Prince Edward, was born in March 1964. Elizabeth was only the 6th officially recognised Queen Regnant of England or Britain after Mary I and Elizabeth I of the House of Tudor, Mary II and Queen Anne during the House of Stuart, and then Queen Victoria in the 19th century. There was a constitutional issue when it came to a Queen Regnant and the title of her husband. Elizabeth I had never married, while Mary I and Mary II had both ruled in association with their husbands, Philip II of Spain and William III. They were co-rulers. However, in the case of Queen Anne and Queen Victoria, their husbands, Prince George and Prince Albert, had not been given the title of king. They remained princes after the accession of their wives as Queen Regnant, to avoid the more senior title of king causing precedence issues. This pattern was followed with the first Queen Regnant of the House of Windsor. Philip remained plain Prince Philip, rather than King Philip after Elizabeth became Queen. Nonetheless, Philip was not entirely happy with the dispensation, and in 1960 it was decided that his children would take his name, while also retaining the Windsor dynastic name. Philip had adopted the Mountbatten surname as his mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg, the strand of the royal family that became known as the Mountbattens in 1917 when the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha also became the House of Windsor. Hence, in 1960, the senior line of the House of Windsor became the House of Mountbatten-Windsor. Although senior royals are not meant to use their surname, instead being referred to simply as Prince or Princess and their personal name, the Mountbatten-Windsor surname is now applied to one member of the royal family, the former Prince Andrew, for all the wrong reasons, a topic to which we'll return shortly. During the 1950s, 1960s and beyond, Elizabeth and Philip oversaw a period of modernization of the monarchy. This was the era of the beginning of television and the growth of mass media, and Elizabeth was much more visible in the public eye than any of her predecessors had been. Moreover, with the British Empire coming to an end in a wave of decolonization, the monarchy was continuing to transition from a symbol of British power to a national overseer of charitable endeavours and royal patronage. Elizabeth managed this role quietly and effectively throughout her very long life and reign. Her sister had more difficulties being in the public eye. Princess Margaret's troubles stemmed from her relationship with a Royal Air Force officer, Peter Townsend, in the early 1950s. Townsend was divorced, and this was a time when the Church of England, of which Margaret's sister was the supreme head, refused to sanction the remarriage of people who had obtained divorces, so long as their former spouse was still alive. Margaret eventually ended her relationship with Townsend in 1955, under considerable pressure from the royal establishment and the government. She went on to marry the photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones, yet she appears to have been deeply impacted by how her relationship with Townsend played out and her life was troubled in many ways. She and Armstrong Jones had 2 children, David and Sarah, born in 1961 and 1964. Although he was not a member of the House of Windsor, one of the most influential members of the royal establishment during the 20th century was Louis, Lord Mountbatten. He was a royal cousin, but the dynastic changes of 1917 meant that, from a legal standpoint, he was not a member of the House of Windsor. Louis was born in 1900 and was a great-grandson of Queen Victoria. He was a member of the House of Battenberg, the branch of the wider royal family in Britain that adopted the name Mountbatten in 1917, right around the time the royal family took the Windsor name. Moreover, Mountbatten was the uncle of Prince Philip, and thus the great-uncle of the present King Charles III. As such, while he was not a legal member of the House of Windsor, he was closely intertwined with the royal family. Mountbatten was the most acclaimed military figure amongst the wider royals in modern times. After a competent interwar career, he came into his own during the Second World War and was eventually appointed as Supreme Allied Commander of the Southeast Asia Command, meaning that he had operational control over the India-Burma-China front against the Japanese in the war. Afterwards, he served as the last Governor-General of India before independence, the first Sea Lord, and the Chief of the Defence Staff down to 1965. Mountbatten died violently in 1979 when a bomb planted by the Irish Republican Army exploded on his fishing vessel off the coast of Ireland, while holidaying near Northern Ireland at the height of the troubles there. By the late 1970s, the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, had entered his early 30s, and pressure was growing for him to marry, start a family, and produce an heir. Charles had been linked with several women, including Camilla Shand, the daughter of an army officer, Major Bruce Shand, who he might have tried to marry had it not been for the strictures within the royal establishment at this time about marrying below one's station. He was also linked to Lady Sarah Spencer. Eventually, though, Charles would end up marrying Sarah's younger sister, Diana. She was born in 1961. Charles and Diana were first romantically linked in 1980, when she was in her late teens and he was in his early 30s. Despite some incompatibility between the two, the potential marriage was approved of by Charles's parents, and in February 1981, after a quite swift courtship, Charles proposed to Diana. They were married on the 29th of July 1981. 2 sons followed soon after, William in June 1982 and Henry, better known as Harry, in September 1984. Thereafter, the marriage began to collapse. By the late 1980s, both Charles and Diana were believed to be engaged in affairs. Diana was first linked with Barry Albert Manakee, a police officer who was assigned to the Royal Protection Squad, and then later with James Hewitt, a British Army officer. Meanwhile, Charles reignited his relationship with Camilla Shand, who by then was known as Camilla Parker Bowles, after marrying Andrew Parker Bowles. By the start of the 1990s, stories about the deteriorating relationship between the Prince and Princess of Wales were a staple of the British tabloids, and it was no surprise when, in 1992, the news was announced that the couple were formally separating, although they would not officially divorce until 1996. Charles and Diana's separation only brought further press attention and problems. Diana had cooperated with the publication of a biography of her in 1992 entitled Diana, Her True Story, written by Andrew Morton. It contained details of the inner workings of the marriage and parts of the royal establishment and caused a sensation. Queen Elizabeth referred to 1992 as her annus horribilis, her horrible year, on account of the collapse of the marriages of several of her children, not just Charles, while a major fire also occurred that year at Windsor Castle, the royal seat from which the family had taken its new name back in 1917. Things did not improve much in the years thereafter. The media seemed determined to depict Charles and the royal establishment as the villains in the collapse of the heir's marriage, but in reality it was simply a relationship that hadn't worked out, entered into by two people for the wrong reasons. Diana was perhaps more sympathetic than Charles, although she also exposed more details about the family than the Windsors were used to doing, notably in a now notorious 1995 BBC interview. That came less than a year before Charles and Diana finalized their divorce. She was killed on the 31st of August 1997 after a high-speed chase through the streets of Paris involving an intoxicated driver and paparazzi pursuing Diana's car at high speed. The public perception of the House of Windsor possibly reached its lowest ever ebb in the period that followed, as they were unfairly perceived as having somehow been responsible for Diana's plight. Over time, the reputation of Charles has fully recovered, as it was realized that what was viewed as a cold reaction in 1997 was simply a product of his reserved character, and that he was deeply hurt by Diana's death. He went on to marry Camilla Parker Bowles in 2005. In a peculiar turn of events, one of Elizabeth's other children, Princess Anne, finalized her divorce in 1992, the year that Charles and Andrew separated from their respective wives. Anne has lived her life in a similar vein to Princess Mary much earlier in the 20th century. She has been a dependable royal who has avoided controversy, although she and her husband did narrowly avoid a kidnapping and assassination attempt in 1974. Around this time, Anne garnered a reputation as a respected equestrian. She won gold at the 1971 European Eventing Championships, among other medals, and in 1976 she became the first member of the royal family to ever compete at the Olympics when she appeared at the Games in Montreal, riding her mother's horse, Goodwill. Anne first married Mark Phillips in 1973. They had two children, Peter, born in 1977, and Zara, born in 1981. After divorcing in 1992, she immediately married Timothy Lawrence, a former equerry to the Queen. Their affair had been public knowledge for several years at that time. They married in Scotland, where the Church of Scotland already licensed divorcees to remarry, thus getting around the problem which Princess Margaret had experienced with the Church of England back in the 1950s. Anne's youngest brother, Prince Edward, married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, and they had two children, Louise and James, the youngest grandchildren of Elizabeth II. In 2023, he was given the title of Duke of Edinburgh, which had previously been held by his father, Prince Philip, who died in April 2021 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of Elizabeth II's four children, and indeed of all the members of the House of Windsor, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, Duke of York, has unquestionably become the most controversial. He married Sarah Ferguson in 1986 and had two daughters with her, Beatrice and Eugenie. They announced their separation in 1992 and divorced in 1996, but their relationship is unusual in that they have continued to be very close following their legal separation. For instance, Andrew and Sarah have regularly lived together, and neither of them have ever remarried. There were moments of notoriety in the 1980s and 1990s, and they also ran into considerable financial and legal difficulties as a result of living beyond their means. But what really brought about Andrew's downfall was his relationship with the American financier and convicted teenage sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew was infamously photographed alongside one of Epstein's many victims, Virginia Giuffre, while she was 17 years old in London in 2001. Despite Epstein's subsequent arrest, conviction, and brief imprisonment in the years thereafter, Andrew and Sarah continued to maintain a relationship with him. His fall began when the photograph of him and Giuffre in 2001 was released. After repeated attempts to claim it was fake, Andrew engaged in a disastrous interview on BBC's Newsnight in November 2019. his bungled effort to exonerate himself began a period in which he was stripped of his honours and positions. In the middle of this, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Geoffrey in 2022, an action which many perceived as a tacit admission of guilt. A slow drip feed of further revelations about how Andrew and his ex-wife had continued to liaise with Epstein for much of the period, down to the second arrest and death of Epstein in prison in 2019, led to King Charles III taking the decision to strip his brother of all remaining titles and privileges in October 2025. Today, he is known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and is no longer referred to by any royal title. The House of Windsor has always comprised of a variety of members of the family, some who have aroused controversy, and others who have seemingly carried the weight of being constantly in the public eye quite well. Prince William, the elder son of Charles and Diana, fits into the latter category. Like many of the male members of the royal family, he served for a time in the military from 2006 onwards. By then, he had already attended the University of St Andrews, where he met his future wife, Catherine Middleton. They were finally married at Westminster Abbey on the 29th of April 2011, after separating for a period of time during the mid-2000s. They were created Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, as William was the second in line to the throne, after which they became the Prince and Princess of Wales. They have had 3 children: George, born in 2013, Charlotte, born in 2015, and Louis, born in 2018. William has since become heir to the throne. Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle at 96 years of age on the 8th of September 2022. With this, Charles ascended as King Charles III. He was 73 years of age at the time, and was the oldest person to ever become King of England or Britain when he did so. Charles has presided over a slimmed-down and more streamlined monarchy, though one that has been impacted by both himself and his daughter-in-law Catherine having to receive treatment for cancer early in 2024. Charles continues to receive treatment, though it is unclear what kind of cancer he is suffering from, as Buckingham Palace has not revealed this. With his accession in 2022, William and Catherine became Prince and Princess of Wales, while their eldest son, George, is now second in line to the throne. Their daughter, Charlotte, is third in line. This is an unusual development in and of itself, as through virtually all of English and British royal history, the line of succession would have prioritized the male children of the senior line, meaning that Louis, despite being younger than Charlotte, would be the third in line. However, the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013 removed any gender male preference within the succession rule of primogeniture, meaning that henceforth any daughter who is the first-born child of a British monarch will be the first in line to the throne. While William has managed to almost completely avoid any controversy over the years, the relationship between his brother and the rest of the family has become a constant source of newspaper reports and speculation. In 2018, Harry married the American actress Meghan Markle. The wedding itself led to a media frenzy, not only because it was a royal wedding, but also because of issues which arose around the attendance of Markle's father and contact which he had made with press outlets prior to it. Beyond this, the wedding seemed to go well, and the public perception was that the marriage of Harry and Meghan represented another stage in the modernization of the monarchy, with little heed being paid to her background in America. However, things soured before long for the new Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the titles they were given at the time of their marriage. Newspaper reports proliferated about tensions between the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of Sussex, after an initial period in which they had seemed to have become close friends. Then came the announcement in 2020 that Harry and Meghan intended to step away from their official royal duties. They would also relocate to North America, eventually settling in California after protracted speculation about their security arrangements. Enormous media contracts were signed between them and Netflix and other outlets, leading to television shows and the appearance of Harry's autobiography entitled Spare, a reference to being the spare heir. Throughout these years, the family's internal affairs played out in a very public way, revealing an almost complete collapse of the relationship between Harry and William, while Charles is also obviously deeply unhappy with the turn of events. On the few occasions when Harry has returned to Britain for family events, such as the coronation of his father, it has typically been a swift visit. Meghan and their family did not attend the coronation, and there appears to be little sign of a reconciliation coming any time soon. There are, of course, other members of the House of Windsor beyond those who have become kings or queens, or are close to the line of succession. Elizabeth II had 8 grandchildren, as each of her 4 children had 2 children each. At the time of her death, she had a dozen great-grandchildren, and that number has continued to grow since. Margaret's branch of the family is smaller. However, the House of Windsor is much larger again if we extend the net beyond the daughters of King George VI and the Queen Mother, and their subsequent branches of the family. George V and Mary of Teck were, after all, the first monarchs of the family, and they had 6 children. While Prince John died in childhood, and Edward VIII never had children with Wallis Simpson after his abdication, the 3 other children, Princess Mary, Prince Henry, and even Prince George prior to his untimely death in 1942, all had children who went on to create junior branches of the House of Windsor. For instance, as we have seen, Princess Mary had 2 sons via her marriage to Henry Lascelles, Earl of Harewood, George and Gerald. Both performed various royal duties in the second half of the 20th century or played a role in other elements of British public life. George, for instance, was a director of the Royal Opera House for many years and was president of the English Football Association between 1963 and 1971. As of early 2026, 4 of George V's grandchildren are still alive: Prince Richard, Duke of Gloucester, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, Prince Michael of Kent, and Princess Alexandra, the Honourable Lady Ogilvy. In total, George V and Mary of Teck had 6 children, 9 grandchildren, 22 great-grandchildren, and 52 great-great-grandchildren, with a growing array of great-great-great-grandchildren. Over time, the House of Windsor, in its junior or cadet branches, has become quite large. The future of the House of Windsor looks very clear from the perspective of 2026. King Charles III will clearly have a much shorter reign than his mother, much like how Edward VII ruled for only a brief time, compared to the nearly 60 years he was the heir to the throne, as a result of his mother's very long reign. After Charles's time, William will almost certainly ascend as King William IV, the first monarch of that name in Britain since the days of William III, back in the late 17th century and the very beginning of the 18th. Prince George is the next in line to the throne after him. The monarchy will continue to evolve under the next generations. Indeed, it has already changed profoundly under the House of Windsor, while Charles has sought to establish a slimmed-down royal establishment. William is of a younger generation that will probably bring less formality again to the position. He and his family will have to manage everything from how social media influences the monarchy going forward to questions about the royal estate which regularly surface. Possibly the biggest issue facing the House of Windsor, though, is the monarch's position, whether it be Charles today or William in due course, as head of numerous Commonwealth nations that could decide to follow the example set by Barbados in 2021 and become republics, severing their long-standing ties to the monarchy in the process. Jamaica, for instance, is actively considering this, though larger Commonwealth nations like Australia and New Zealand remain broadly supportive of having the head of the House of Windsor as the ceremonial head of their states. The House of Windsor has had a difficult history in many ways. Over slightly more than 100 years, their position in the public eye has not been easy. The dynasty was born out of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in July 1917, in the midst of the First World War, when unease arose about the family's German-sounding name and their ancestral roots in Central Europe. None of the monarchs of the house have been free of difficulties. George V's health was very poor for much of his reign, and he had to deal with being king during both the First World War and the Great Depression. A crisis followed his death early in 1936 after Edward VIII ascended to the throne and then renounced it before the year was out, so that he could continue his relationship with Wallis Simpson. He continued to cause the royal family and British government problems even after he went into voluntary exile in France. His closest successors, his brother George VI and his eldest daughter Elizabeth II, were successful monarchs by any standard, though George VI's life was cut very short due to the same kind of respiratory and circulatory problems that ailed his father, worsened by habitual smoking. Yet, the success of their respective reigns did not make life easy for all. A son of George V, George, Duke of Kent, was killed while serving during the Second World War, while Elizabeth's sister struggled with her position in the public eye, and a close royal cousin, Lord Mountbatten, was assassinated by the IRA in Ireland in 1979. In more recent times, the House of Windsor has suffered from several scandals, notably over Charles and Diana's marital woes in the 1980s and early 1990s, and more recently the twin issues of Harry's alienation from his family and the much more serious charges against Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Despite these difficulties, many of which are a byproduct of lives lived so intensely in the public eye, the House of Windsor has overseen a major period of change in British royal history, one in which the monarchy has been transformed, losing its remaining political power and influence, but emerging at the same time as a valuable, moral and charitable institution within Britain and the Commonwealth. What do you think of the House of Windsor? Have they succeeded in modernising the monarchy during a period of profound social change in British life? Or has the royal family simply become a magnet for scandal ever since the abdication crisis of 1936? Please let us know in the comments section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.